what you're praying for, and what we want to know, is we want to know ourselves as a loved sinner who is called. Notice the juxtaposition of those things. A loved sinner who is called. That is, you're loved not in spite of your sinfulness, but in light of your sinfulness. That nothing you do will change how God orients God's self to you. God's one unalterable orientation to you and to me is, I love you, 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 I love you. Now, do we always accept the love? Do we always respond in generosity and compassion? Do we always make the right choices in the hard moment? We are sinners. That is the state of us. That's who we are. It's on our resume. You can't take it off. That's who we are. But, Ignatius pounds home the message of Jesus. That's not what I came to talk about. I came to set you free from that. You are a loved sinner who is called to be something, to be someone, to be this unique manifestation in the history of the universe. Will you work with me? Ignatius hears God saying, will you work with me to become that person? Self-knowledge. That interior voice in the hard decisions. When Catholics talk about conscience, conscience is this, sometimes we say, oh, it's the inner voice. Do you remember? No, you probably don't remember, but there were the old cartoons. In the old Warner Brothers cartoons, sometimes characters had a good version of themselves on one shoulder and a bad version of themselves on the other, and they would be whispering in the ear, like Bugs Bunny would have this, or Yosemite Sam would have it. He was always bad. So it must have been Bugs Bunny that had this, the good voice and the bad voice, right? And I remember as a little kid, my father sort of stumbling through theology to teach me about this, and he said, well, it's like that, boy, that's conscience, okay, just go play. Well, there's this voice the church speaks of, this inner voice. It's not just an inner dialogue or monologue with myself, but rather, in the language of the church, it's this conversation with this law, this truth, this presence of God that's planted deep within our hearts. But you got to listen for it. Have you ever felt called to something? Have you ever felt that God was drawing you to someone or something, or maybe away from someone or something? Well, how did you know that? How did you listen to that? How did you hear that? This is the question of the conscience. And of course, the church says the conscience has to be informed. You have to learn, you have to study, you have to draw in, because our rational abilities are a big part of who we are. But do you listen? Can you hear what the voice is saying inside of you? That voice that comes from God. How do you listen to the deepest desires? Ignatius was always saying, what do you really want? What do you really want? What's the deepest desire of your heart? And when you can name that, ask God for it. What do you really want? Well, I know what everybody wants. I know that the psalmist is right, the author of the Psalms, who says, the heart's desire is to know and be known, to love and be loved. The heart's desire is to know and be known, to love and be loved. That's true for all of us. If you're denying that, you're wasting lots of energy in your life denying it. We want to be known. We want others to know us. We want to know others. We want to love others. We want to give ourselves away in love, and we want to be loved in return. And we want both of those things in relationship with God. And we Catholics believe that God gets mediated to us through things and people. And so we want to engage that. Do you know the deepest desires of your heart? Thomas Aquinas, in talking about sin, once said the problem is we love things and use people instead of the other way around. That's when we lose sight of what that deepest desire is. My deepest desire isn't to be rich, although that could be a nice thing. That's not my deepest desire. So Ignatius is pushing this interior life through the exercises that helps us in those moments of the deep questions. He also gives us a template, a way of talking about discernment, about decision-making. Now, typically when Ignatius talks about discernment, he's talking about making choices between two goods, which is usually the more difficult question. Choosing between two goods, career choices perhaps, ways of life, whatever it might be. But it's applicable, these principles of discernment are applicable to these questions where, the hard questions as we've named it, where we're trying to make ethical choices about our lives in difficult circumstances. But we cannot make those good choices unless we know who we are, unless we know who we are in relationship to God. And if we can hold that up in our lives, Peter forgets who he is. Peter forgets who he is. When people come to confession and say, that's not me, I don't want to be that person, they're saying the same thing that Peter blurted out through his weeping after that moment of denying his friend. That's not me. I want to be more than that. I let him down. I want more. So, what is the more? What is, in Ignatius' language, the magis? What does it mean to reach for the more in life, to live a deeper life of meaning, and to have drawn out of me, with God's help, who I'm called to become? And who we're called to become in Ignatius' construct, who we're called to be, is a companion of Jesus, a friend of Jesus, a co-laborer with Jesus. This is not always easy for Catholics to hear. I grew up very traditional Catholic family in Chicago in a Catholic parish, and it was a tremendous way to grow up. But we never really talked a whole lot about a personal relationship with Jesus. We always thought that sounded kind of Protestant. I tell the story all the time that one time I was going out to give one of these talks, and my father called me, and I was trying to get out of my house, and I was trying to get off the phone with my daddy. Dad, I got to go give this talk. And he says, you know, I've always wanted to ask you, what do you talk about at those things? And I said, oh, it's all about becoming a friend of Jesus. Long pause. My father's 83. It's kind of Protestant, isn't it? He said. Yeah, it is. I'll talk to you later. I'm sure he's fretting around the house. And, oh my God, he's a Protestant. I thought he was a priest. This companionship with Jesus is what Ignatius knew in his lived experience. That Jesus, that God wanted Ignatius in relationship with Jesus, a friendship, an accessible, tangible relationship that could be felt through his lived experience. Making the difficult choices is a different reality when we live out of that context. What does it mean for me when I'm reminded of who I am and what relationship it is that I am in when I'm trying to make those difficult choices? The drama of that scene from the gospel, the way the evangelist set it up, especially here in Luke's version, is Jesus is looking at him as he denies him. Oh my God. But there's distance between them. There's big space between them. And in the distance, in the spacing, Peter fails. And he forgets who he is. And so what Ignatius says to us through the spiritual exercises is, do you want to come closer to Jesus? Do you want to step into this relationship, into this friendship? Because if you do, it will change everything. And it will change how you look at these questions, these moral questions, these difficult questions of life. And that you'll bring to it a sense of yourself in light of this relationship that will be liberating.